All rise, please, for the Chairman of the Council, Mandy Smith, Vice Chair Mac Maguire, and the Reverend John Smith.
Good morning, members. May I first of all introduce Reverend John Smith, the Senior Pastor at Cambridgeshire Baptist Church, who will lead us in prayers.
Thank you. Coming and being with you this morning. Put positively, one of the Proverbs says this: there are 7 things the Lord loves: humble eyes, truthful tongue, innocent hands, a heart that devises honest schemes, feet that are quick to rush into good, an honest witness, and a person who builds up community. For those that pray, and perhaps for those of us who don't pray but would like to reflect on these things, let's pray together. Lord God, we want to pray for ourselves and our civic responsibilities in this county. The Bible urges us to first of all pray and intercede and give thanks for all people, for kings and those in authority, that we may live peaceful and quiet lives in all godliness and holiness. And so we pray for those who are leaders within our community, who are concerned with your concerns. We pray that today we might act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly. We pray that we won't be so concerned with our own power, our own status, or even our own glory. Rather, that we will seek to serve the people that we represent, and particularly those who have no voice, those who need others to step in to protect them, to show them mercy in a world which sometimes is harsh and unfair. Lord God, I pray for these county councillors, that they will have the courage and the wisdom to make bold decisions, either through the nature of those decisions or through the way that they make those decisions. We pray that this might be a beacon of hope in the corridors of power, building communities of hope and peace. Lord, I pray that these people will have the integrity in their lives and their public roles to show the concerns that you have for the poor and the vulnerable, for the refugee and the outcast. We pray that you will raise up those to support them, encourage them, challenge them in the roles in which you have placed them, and that they will take great encouragement in the work that they do this day. We pray that in all the things that happen today, it might enable a strong and compassionate community to be developed, where each of us can live peacefully, quiet lives in godliness and holiness. All this we pray in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Members, please be seated. The first item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes of the meeting of the Council held on the 15th of May 2018. The Council is asked to agree these as correct records. Do members agree?
Agree, Chair.
I will therefore sign them. Yeah, we'll do them in a minute. Whilst I'm signing those, I'll go through apologies. After. Apologies. So far I have apologies from Councillor Bates, Hickford, Rains, Councillor Van der Ven and Wilson. I also have Councillor Joseph and Councillor David Wells. Can I ask if there are any further apologies from anyone, or anyone who's aware of apologies? Thank you. I do have a few announcements to read. Firstly, I would like to welcome members of the public to this meeting of the Council. You are very welcome, and I hope that you find this meeting of interest. The Council supports the principle of transparency and encourages filming, recording and taking photographs at its meetings that are open to the public. Members are advised that this meeting may therefore be filmed, recorded or photographed. This meeting is being live streamed to the web and the County Council's YouTube channel. I would like to highlight this to members of the public that they may be filmed as part of this meeting and that this will appear on the web. Please can I ask all members and the members of the public to turn their mobile phones to silent or vibrate whilst the meeting is taking place. Members will wish to note that Amanda Askam has been appointed as the Council's new Director of Business Improvement and Development. She will add great capacity and strategic oversight to help drive forward the Council's commercial and transformation agendas, making the Council stronger moving forward. I am delighted to report that Adults Early Help Team were runners-up in the Career Friendly Social Care Award. This award is for a social care team, care manager, youth worker or individual who has demonstrated the most carer-friendly approach in their working role, who has made a difference by going the extra mile. Finally, I would like to invite all members to take part in a council photograph. Will you therefore make your way to the front steps of Shire Hall at the lunch break or when the council finishes, where the photograph will be taken. That concludes my announcements for today. Next is an item on declarations of interest. Under this item, members are asked to declare interest under the Code of Conduct in any item on the agenda for today's meeting, if they are not registered on the Register of Interests. May I have any declarations of interest now, please? If you do have interests going along, please feel free to raise them at the appropriate time. We now move on to item 4, which is public question time, which allows members of the public to ask questions at the council meeting, provided that they have given advance notice. The council has received notice of 2 questions, the contents of which has been circulated electronically to all members and published on the council's website. Could I first please ask Mr. Carpen to come forward and ask his question, please?
Right, can you hear me, ladies and gentlemen? Splendid. Good morning, everyone. This question is all about buses. Some of you may have been aware that the Cambridge Area Bus Users Group has recently formed, but this question is in particular to really a group of people who are underrepresented or don't have a voice, as was mentioned earlier. And this is the children and young people who, many of whom are going to be going to new places of study for the first time, just like I used to be one of them. And so, in particular, those coming in from the towns and villages to come into Cambridge to study, in particular at Hills Road, Long Road Sixth Form Colleges and Cambridge Regional College, I wanted to table this question to find out what steps the county councillors and institution and also individual councillors are going to be taking to ensure that whenever children and young people come across problems with the bus services, as they will inevitably do, and also perhaps the train services, given the headlines and the experiences of the past few months, that you are proactively reaching out to them and putting notices up where they happen to be so that they can get in contact with you early on and not have to wait, whether it's coming through the bus campaign or through the colleges otherwise. So I table the question as on the order paper. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. I'll answer the question as it's submitted and is on the record books. So thank you, Mr. Cartman, for this question. These are important questions that you raise, and it's in all of our interests to ensure that students have the information and the services that allow them to get to their places of study. It's also important to understand, however, the role of this council and the role that this council plays in that journey. Our main responsibility is to provide transport for eligible students to their places of study, and we do this successfully for thousands of students every single day, or every single school day. We also subsidise some, just a few, local bus services that can't be provided commercially, that are available to all, including students. Beyond that, students are using services that are provided commercially by the bus companies. We work with the bus companies and we help to publicise these services and are always available to provide advice should we be contacted by educational institutions. We're also committed to working with partners to improve the bus services that are available. The responsibility for developing the bus network across the county is now the responsibility of the Combined Authority, the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority, having taken over the powers of Transport Authority for this area for just over a year ago. And we have assisted them in developing their strategic bus strategy that will be published later on this year. Whilst I fully understand all the points that you raise, Mr. Carpen, I therefore suggest it is more appropriate that you raise these questions with the Combined Authority, who I'm sure would be able to add and further assist in the points that I've already made. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Count. Mr. Carpen, you have 1 minute as a supplementary question, if you wish.
Thank you very much. So I guess this is my appeal to all councillors, given the relatively new structures that we've got with the Mayor and the Combined Authority, for you to act as champions for those young people, because I'm still trying to get my head around who has what responsibilities, and I follow many of you around more than is sensible. So how someone who is 16, 17, just left school and has to try and figure out who does what, I actually think there's a responsibility of all of you who've got a much better understanding of who does what and how the systems and processes function, for you to actually step forward and help them. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Carpen. Councillor Count, you do have a right to answer if you wish.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. The one thing I can say to that, Mr. Carpen, is really we're all elected councillors here in this room, in this chamber, and we're all here to help our residents. So when you come into contact with any specific pupil, parent, school, institution that has an issue that you need resolving, contact your local councillor, and we will discover for you the route that we can use best to try and facilitate whatever the issue is. So that's why we're all here. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Mr. Carpen, for your question. Next, can I ask Ms. Heal to come forward and ask her question, please?
Good morning. As a friend of Milton Road Library, I join my fellow members in eager anticipation of our new local library and community facility, and I thank you all for enabling this to happen. It is situated at the corner of Milton Road and Asham Road in the heart of West Chesterton, close to nurseries and schools and surrounded by enthusiastic residents. The Friends have worked with the local community to engage enthusiasm and excitement while awaiting our new library. From the start, we have worked effectively with councillors and residents to listen to what people want and work successfully with county officers and contractors to shape the build of what will be there to offer. We are now considering the internal facilities to maximise use for flexible all-age library and community use. Earlier this month, we worked with the local school, Milton Road Primary School, to deliver the Art of Reading project. All 420 children in the school were involved in this, working with local volunteers and artists to create the beautiful hoarding, and I encourage you to go down Milton Road to see that. This was generated through the Friends of Milton Road Library, and money for this was raised through local businesses, parents, local schools, residents, and thanks to a city council grant. It was true community engagement. I've no doubt that this fantastic facility will be a great community hit. The Friends are preparing for a new generation of library users who will be able to access books, the internet, listen to talks, study, watch film, get involved in arts and culture, opportunities for all in one hub. We are planning for now and generations to come, and catering for young and old. This building is due to open in about 10 months' time, and I seek security that this will stand the test of time and be a public asset for all generations to come. With financial pressures, public amenities sometimes suffer, but we have been heartened working with the experienced county officers on the long-term ambitions that we share for this library. There was local concern about the physical change of the library, where the old single-store library, which was much loved by many, had to be replaced with a library on the ground floor and market rentable flats above. Residents were assured that this revenue-generating development would keep the library open for generations to come, and that was the way of securing its long-term future. Since this development was approved, and we've worked on this, we now understand, although we weren't officially told, that the land on which the library is being built has now been transferred to a company called This Land Limited, which we understand is a wholly owned subsidiary of the County Council, but appears to have no official public scrutiny. My question is in the paper. Do you want me to reread that, or? No. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Schumann, I understand that you are to answer.
Thank you, Chairman. And thank you, Ms Hill, for your question, and thank you and the Friends of Milton Road Library for your hard work. I'm sure all members will join me in thanking you for what you do. And may I provide the following response. The lease term was agreed by negotiation with This Land, the landlord, and was considered to be a reasonable period for the council given service needs may change over time. The lease has a statutory protection of Part 2 of the Landlord and Tenant Act 1954. Therefore, the tenant, in this case Cambridgeshire County Council, has the automatic right to renew that tenancy term, which can only be opposed on certain grounds by the landlord. Additionally, the council wholly owns the landlord and consequently has a great deal of influence in any future agreement.
Thank you. Ms Hill, you do have a supplementary question of 1 minute if you wish.
Thank you. Thank you for the clarification. I think we're all still a little concerned about the exact details of this, and just curious why it's only 25 years, as most leases at least seem to be as a minimum of 99, and that is what we have been advised by other people involved in this kind of world. So 25 seems unduly short-sighted. We understand that the building being constructed on the site of Milton Road will be leased to the County Council, and you've just confirmed that. Is it possible to understand in more detail what are the heads of terms for this lease, and has any covenant been put on the title restricting it in any way? And if so, is the way of finding the wording for the covenant of this lease which would secure the public? Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Schumann, would you like to reply?
Thank you, Chairman. May I commit myself, Ms Hill, to speaking with the Managing Director of This Land and providing more information to you and the Friends of Milton Road Library about negotiations. Some of the information may be commercially sensitive, but anything we can publish and any information we can provide to you will certainly do so. And I'm sure that the negotiations and the information around those will probably explain further why the service has requested that length of lease as much as the landlord has requested that length of lease. And I will commit to doing that after this full council meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Schumann. Thank you, Ms Hill, for your question. Item 5 is on petitions and allows members of the public to present petitions in accordance with the agreed protocol. No petitions were received, so we move on to the next item. Before I proceed with the agenda, can I please remind you about the audio and voting system? In order to register to speak, you need to press the silver button. You will then be automatically added to my list of speakers. If you have a point of order, this means that there has been an alleged breach of the council rules of procedure or law, so I will need the member to indicate the rule or law which he or she considers has been broken, or personal explanation, This may only relate to some material part of an earlier speech by the member, which may appear to have been misunderstood in the present debate. You need to raise your hand. Please do not press the button. We now move on to item 6. We have 2 items for determination. The first item relates to the Single Equality Strategy 2018 to 2022, which was discussed by General Purposes Committee on the 29th of May 2018. Can I please ask the Chairman of the General Purposes Committee, Councillor Count, to move the recommendations as set out on the Council agenda?
I do so move.
Thank you very much. And I understand, and you have a second. Thank you very much. Can I please ask if there are any questions or if there's any debate on this answer? I do have some speakers.
Do you want me to introduce?
Sorry, Councillor Count, if you can just say a few words to present the paper to us, please.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. The Council is committed to promoting equality and celebrating diversity in line with the Public Sector Equality Duty, the Equality Act 2010 and the Cambridgeshire Equality Pledge. This means ensuring that our services are fair and accessible to everyone. We are a fair and equitable employer, committed to achieving a diverse and culturally competent workforce. We recognise and celebrate the diversity of our communities. The groups that have so far helped develop this strategy and the accompanying action plan are the Council Diversity Group, made up of a member from each political party and senior officers. Also, the Equality and Diversity Action Group, made up of officers from across council services to ensure the delivery of the action plan. There's also a staff and member equality and diversity network, which offers more informal support and opportunities for colleagues and members to meet together. The strategy has 3 objectives, one focused on our workforce, members and employment practices, and the other 2 focused on delivering fair, accessible services and celebrating diversity in our communities. Our work around equalities and diversity is very important, and we also want to give the opportunity for wider member involvement in this activity. In an ever-changing world in which we live in, we want to explore how the next version of this strategy can encompass our shared service work vision with Peterborough City Council, as well as other important developments. This is why, as part of this paper, we are recommending that we establish an expanded member working group that will replace the existing CDG and an expanded EDAG officer group to incorporate... Oh dear, I should really stop. To incorporate the equalities and diversities responsibilities, to look in more detail at this strategy and the accompanying action plan. One of the ways we demonstrate our commitment to equality and diversity is through our programme of events, and you will find a number of these listed in the report. As part of the discussions at the General Purposes Committee, it was agreed to make available the draft action plan for full council, which is available on the same web page as the council agenda. And for further information, the recommendations to General Purposes Committee were endorsed unanimously by all political parties. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Count. Councillor White.
Thank you, Chair. I welcome very much particularly the action plan, which I did ask for at General Purposes Committee, and I'm very pleased to see it. I think it makes a very, very good start on implementing the strategy that we've got. And I think we all look forward to hearing reports periodically of progress on looking at the strategy. Whether that will come to staffing and appeals or GPC or both, I don't know. But I think it is important that the strategy is monitored, our action plan is monitored, and that we do get regular updates on progress on the fields that have been identified. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Whitehead. Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Chair. Of course, as a Labour group, we do endorse this strategy. However, we also need to make clear that there are real problems in implementing it. And I refer, for example, I'm very pleased to be a member of this committee, and I have been since its inception, but I do refer to the category that deals with the delivery of services. This council is in a position where it cannot deliver services so as to properly affirm those persons with a disability, children and young people, as an example. We've changed the whole policy with regard to children's centres. We've actually decimated the Sure Start program. We are in a position where schools are seeking to academise because they believe that it will be more advantageous to them, because what they see is that the council can no longer provide the services that we did in the past. For example, CREDS has gone, and therefore schools are in a position where they have to seek the provision from elsewhere. In terms of the cafeteria and the canteen services, I've actually had residents contacting me where our service has been withdrawn and the school has gone over to a private service, and now what parents are being asked to do is provide a medical certificate to affirm that their child has special dietary needs, whereas in the past our service actually provided the special dietary needs without the need for a medical certificate. And so I draw this to the attention of this council because in affirming this policy, we need to recognise that we cannot actually live up to the commitments that we've made in it. I also wish to refer to the position of councillors ourselves and to say this, that if our role is to ensure that we are able to affirm equality principles out there, we, every one of us, ought to actually agree that we undertake compulsory equalities training and that we do affirm, each of us individually, to the standards of non-racism, non-homophobia, non-sexism and so on. Because the problem with people who are elected to public office, as we have been, is that we are supposed to affirm those principles and those standards, and yet there have been issues within this council where individual councillors have sadly breached that requirement, and therefore, in my opinion, we ought, each of us, as I've said, affirm that we will undergo compulsory training and that we will do this on a continuing basis so that this policy that we are now affirming here in this council can be properly affirmed by each one of us as a councillor, and that we actually ensure that we can provide the services that we're supposed to, for example, to persons with a disability, to children and to young people, by ensuring that we have proper funding to serve and to support the services that we are supposed to be providing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. I have no further speakers. Councillor Count, would you like to say a few words? You have the right to say.
Yes, Madam Chairman. Yeah, I've decided to answer all the questions that were raised during the speech, and as many of them seem to be more of a political statement nature than actual questions, I believe my work is done.
Thank you, Councillor Count. We have no... basically, is everybody happy that I take this vote by acclamation? Those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? Therefore, it's therefore carried. Councillor Harrison, sorry. Okay. I don't know, but basically we have moved on. Nobody else put the name forward anyway. The second item relates to the Treasury Management Report, Q4 report, which was discussed by General Purposes Committee on the 29th of May 2018. Can I ask the Chairman of the General Purposes Committee, Councillor Count, to move the recommendation as set out on the Council agenda?
I do so move, Madam Chairman.
Do you have a seconder?
I'm pleased to second, Madam Chairman, and reserve my right to speak.
Thank you very much. Councillor Count, would you therefore like to propose the paper, please?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. Treasury Management Report, Quarter 4, 2018. We're quite used to the format of these by now, I hope. I'm going to just pay some attention to some of the key headlines. So there were adequate returns of 0.41% on our investments, which are benchmarked, as you can see in the paper. There was a £1.98 million underspend that was delivered against debt charges, which positively affected the overall position of the council out-term budget. We took out an option to repay a £4 million loan from Siemens, which was exercised, replacing it with shorter-term and cheaper borrowing, which also reflected the other short-term borrowing decisions rather than long-term due to favourable market conditions. I draw attention to the authorised borrowing limit and operational boundary, which reflect the Council's updated positions from February's meeting. The headroom for borrowing and operational boundaries are approximately 430 and 400 million respectively, so a sizable headroom there for us. Third-party loans have increased and are reported due to the £28.17 million loan to this land limited, and that's reflected in the paperwork. Net debt at March 31st stood at 471 million. This was £5 million higher than predicted at February 2017, a variance of 1.06%. For information, Madam Chairman, at General Purposes Committee, this report received unanimous cross-party vote in favour.
Thank you very much. Do I have any speakers? I have no speakers who have registered. I will therefore take the vote by acclamation. Those in Any against? Any abstentions? That concludes the debate on the items for determination from General Purposes Committee on the 29th of May. Next is item 7, written motions. 2 motions have been submitted. The first motion has been submitted by Councillor Kavanagh. Can I please ask Councillor Kavanagh to move and speak to his motion, and also who is your seconder? Councillor Kavanagh.
Thank you, Chair. You probably don't need...
Who is the seconder as well?
Oh, Councillor Jones.
And do you reserve your right to speak?
Fine. You're probably aware why I've brought this motion here now, today, in July. Those of you who drive in and around the city will have noticed how easy it is. And the reason for that is the school holidays have started for the independent schools in the city, and the state schools will be starting their holidays in a couple of weeks. And it's been measured that something like 15% of the amount of traffic in Cambridge drops when it's school holidays. And the reason for that is, as you're all aware, is because of the school run. It's because of the dependence that parents and others who take their children to school rely on the car to do that. Now, the problem with cars turning up at schools every morning is that they are contributing to raising the pollution levels outside the schools, and this is endangering the health of our children. I'm no stranger to the challenges that parents and others face in getting children to school. I mean, my wife and I were both working full-time, and we used to take our children to school. Fortunately, we were in Cambridge, so we were able to do it by bicycle. And I know many others are not so fortunate. They have to drive in from outside Cambridge. But there are ways of not having to drive into Cambridge. I mean, some schools in the city have arranged to have minibuses in our park and ride centres, and the children get dropped off outside at the park and ride, and they come in minibuses. I'd like to see a further extension of this initiative. But I'm here to sort of urge you to support this motion, because there are councils around the country that in my paper you can see that Solihull, Edinburgh and some of the London boroughs have been trialling having no car zones outside of schools during peak times. And it has been measured that it's been a success. there's been a reduction in the dangerous pollution levels outside of schools due to the measures that have been put in place by these councils. And I urge Cambridge and Cambridgeshire to follow suit. Yes, there's a number of reasons to say no to this, but what we've got to keep in mind is that our children's health is at risk. And across the country, there's actually a huge movement by parents. It's been measured that something like 60% of parents are very concerned about the effects of cars turning up outside schools and dropping the kids off. So these other councils have trialled it and it's worked. And I am asking you here to agree to this. I'm actually urging you to agree with my motion to have schools in Cambridge and to act as trials to see how it works. And then, if it is successful, to extend it to other schools outside Cambridge. If we need support with this, I think we can turn to the combined authority. I think the mayor now has been responsible for transport. I imagine we'll be very enthusiastic about this. We also have the Greater Cambridge Partnership. We have funds there available which would help to implement these measures. So, one thing that I learned in my consultations, I mean, I've been consulting for a long time over this. I've spoken to head teachers, parents, and children about this. And one thing is that there is a desire for this measure to be put in place because we can't rely on people volunteering to do it without some kind of restrictions being in place. I was very heartened to hear today, actually, that there already has been a trial in Histon, and it's been so successful that there's a sense that the police aren't greatly involved anymore. There's a sense that the community have asked for this measure, no car zones, and there's almost a self-policing in place. So there's also, through the initiative of
Councillor Kavanagh, you've gone over time.
Have I run out of time?
Yes.
Yes. So, vote yes to this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanagh. Right, basically, I understand Councillor Singer has an amendment. Who is your seconder? And can I also ask, Councillor Downs is the seconder. You reserve your right to speak. Can I ask Councillor Kavanagh, do you accept the amendment?
No.
Okay. Would like to put forward your amendment, please.
Thank you. I have some concerns about this motion as it is drafted, as it asks this council to take forward no car zones without making explicit the need to consult carefully with partner organisations such as the schools themselves and the police. While I understand that Councillor Kavanagh believes that such consultation is implicit, we feel that such consultation needs to be very, very clear. The idea of reducing traffic around schools at drop-off and pick-up time is, I'm sure, one that all councillors will support. The concept of no car zones could be one way to help reduce traffic around schools, and as such, it is worth exploring with the police and the schools themselves. It is a rather punitive method of attempting to reduce traffic, and I would like to think it would be used only as a last resort. Most schools try hard to encourage their pupils to walk and cycle to school. And with increasing concern about obesity in young people, schemes that encourage walking and cycling should be a high priority for this council. A combination of carrots in the form of improved walking and cycling facilities alongside more punitive measures such as this could help with reducing traffic and encouraging active transport. But such measures must be taken forward with great care and with full consultation rather than tried by the county council alone. Consultation with the schools themselves, I think, is particularly important. Our amendment allows this idea to be taken forward and explored more fully as an option, but with partners rather than as an imposition by the council, and I would ask you to support the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now debate the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Very, very difficult because obviously the ideals that go behind this entire motion is something that we all approve of. Let's reduce car journeys around the schools where our children are perhaps most vulnerable, and the access points. You know, we all know the evidence of the past that there have been issues, but the problem we have is how do we cure this? Now, looking at the motion in its entirety, there are a number of things that I must take issue with. But the point is, we're on the amendment at the moment. And the amendment has, for me, done a valiant job of trying to rescue this motion. There are a lot of flaws with this motion. First one, it was totally Cambridge-centric to start off with. Let's trial it in Cambridge, and then if it's good enough for us, we might let the others have a job. And thankfully, this has been rectified by the Liberal Democrat proposal, the amendment. And there are other points in there. But at the end of the day, it's still trying to make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. It can't be done. There are too many flaws in here, which we'll go on to in the main motion. So I thank the Liberal Democrats for attempting to rescue this, but it's not enough for me to support this. So therefore, I don't want to be implied by supporting the amendment that we're on the journey that this actual motion will be supported. Therefore, I'm sorry, but I must vote this amendment down.
Thank you. Councillor White.
Thank you, Chair. The reason that the Labour Group are not prepared to accept this amendment is because within the original motion, of course, it implies strongly that we have to consult with all persons who are going to be involved, and that does include the police. But what we feel about the amendment is that it hands the decision-making power to the police, because it actually says that if the police feel that such a trial would be possible, then further consultation should go on. We don't feel in a democratic society it should be up to the police to decide whether or not we put in measures to help congestion and improve air pollution around schools. We think it should be a decision of this council, and therefore, of course, we would consult the police, but we don't feel, as this motion, this amendment implies, that they should be the people who have the final say on whether or not such a trial goes ahead. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Dupre.
Thank you, Chairman. We were told that we shouldn't be looking for reasons to vote no to this. And I'm desperately not looking for reasons to vote no. I'm looking for reasons to vote yes to this motion. The problem is that there are some fundamental misunderstandings which, as Councillor Count has stated and as Councillor Nethsinger said in moving the amendment, fatally undermine this amendment. There is a misunderstanding that somehow we can go ahead with this, should we wish, without the support of the police. We have been very clearly advised that it is only the police in law who are allowed to enforce this. And therefore, it makes no sense whatsoever to agree a motion, however well-intentioned, that we cannot implement without the agreement and active support of another party whom we do not engage at all in this motion. The other thing that we wanted to do in this motion was to make it explicit. Quite rightly, I think, that schools need to be active partners in this. And that is not stated here. They're not bodies that this should be done to, but bodies that need to actively support, get with, encourage, promote, and argue for what we're trying to do here. There are any number of reasons to address this issue. It fits into the air quality issue, which is really important. And we saw recently in the national news the story of a 9-year-old girl with asthma who died walking to school in polluted air where her asthma attacks spiked with the spike in air pollution. That's a terrible thing to happen. We mustn't let that happen anymore. We must improve our air quality. It fits into our getting active agenda and encouraging people to be more mobile. It fits into our road safety agenda, and we've heard recently in committee that we are still way, way behind. We're not going to meet the target we set ourselves to reduce the number of people killed and seriously injured on our roads. So there are all sorts of reasons why we should want to address this, but we must do it in partnership with schools, and we cannot, in law, do it without the active support of the police. That's why we put the amendment to try and rescue this. However, I think there is, in some ways, a bit of a misunderstanding on Councillor Count's point as well, if I may say so. At the moment, at this part of the debate, the choice is, do we want to see the motion as it has been proposed, or do we want to see the amendment? And those are the choices facing you. I understand that you can then vote afterwards and you can vote against the motion as amended because it doesn't quite do what you want, and that's fine. But the choice for the administration group at the moment, as the choice is for everybody else, is the amendment better than what went before? And I would encourage you to consider voting for the amendment for the reasons that we've outlined. Just one more thing I wanted to say. The motion proposes one very dictatorial, very punitive way of addressing this situation. There are lots of others. There are communities that are getting together in a voluntary way to promote reduction of vehicles coming outside schools, involving pub car parks, and all sorts of things that we can do voluntarily. I think we need to offer schools a suite of options, practical options, that they can choose from, make up their own minds, work with their communities to address this issue. And if we get the police on board for a scheme such as this, with automatic number plate recognition and so on, and the police say that they will enforce it, then that's fine for those schools that want it, but we cannot do it without the police. And I think that's the fundamental misunderstanding on which this otherwise quite laudable motion actually falls. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Manning.
Thank you, Chair. I think this rather exposes one of the sort of ideological differences around this chamber. The idea that, as Councillor Count said, his group, the Conservative group, have tried to approach this motion in kind of a rational way. We all agree openly with the aims behind it. We all agree with the end result we all want, but we don't necessarily agree with how we get there. And the ideological difference seems to be here, which I think is Councillor Dupre was alluding to, is whether you tell people how to behave, and that's your first option, or whether you try and work with them and then put in the legislation if that all fails. And I think where this motion fails and where the amendment is much better is that it stresses the need to actually identify some schools which might or might not be appropriate. They might be appropriate in Cambridge, they might be appropriate outside of Cambridge. Someone earlier mentioned the idea of compulsory equality, an interesting concept, I feel. In my division, my old division as it was, there were a number of schools. And the schools that had the biggest problem with parents, the majority of parents driving to work in what we would probably regard as an unnecessary way, were the schools with the highest instance of not well-off parents and children. So if you bring in a compulsory, you cannot drive to this school, who will you affect? You'll affect the most disadvantaged people in your community. And that's why this amendment is much better than the original motion, and that's why I would hope that some people around the chamber who may be thinking about not supporting this can support the amendment rather than the original motion.
Thank you. Councillor Bradford.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Count has observed that the Liberal Democrat amendment made what was originally a rather apparently Cambridge-centric motion slightly more mindful of villages outside. I note that in many of our rural villages, the primary school is on the only major road through the village, so this proposal would not be practical. So whilst the principle is not perfect, we all work towards something that's workable, and I would advocate the amendment because, as others have said, it recognises that we clearly need to consult with the schools to see that they feel that this is feasible, and with the police who would have to enforce it. So I advocate for the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Downs, would you like to say anything? You did reserve your right to speak.
Yes. Thank you very much. I think that we all sympathise with the intention of the motion. Particularly, I think the third paragraph and the second half of the third paragraph, where the writer of the motion says, discouraging the school run will boost walking and cycling, improve the health of children through the increase in exercise and help tackle obesity levels and improve the environment. I think we would all agree that that is a very desirable objective. It is a distressing fact that 4 out of 10 of our Year 6 pupils are clinically overweight or obese. and that is an enormous future problem for the health service and for society. So we must support any activities that draw attention to this concern and do a little bit to tackle it. Now, the problem with the motion is that it, I think, fails to recognise the complexity of the issues. Councillor Dupre has already referred to the fact that it is only the police who can apply what Councillor Kavanagh would like to see, which is penalty charge notices for people breaching these zones. So we cannot proceed without serious consultation with the police. Whether the police can take that on when they are so stretched already is another matter. The second point I want to make is that the diversity of the location of schools across Cambridgeshire is enormous. I think I can probably claim to have visited more schools in Cambridgeshire than anybody else in the chamber over my 36 years involvement in Cambridgeshire. And in many cases, this simply would not work. It simply would not work because, as Councillor Brandon said, the location of the school means that to close the road or to restrict the road would cause enormous other problems and also turn people off the objective of the whole exercise. In other words, it would be counterproductive. So what we've tried to do in this modest amendment, this adjustment, is to say, yes, this is a good idea, let's explore it further, but let's explore it down these lines rather than the original ones. And I think this makes good sense, and faute de mieux, I think we should support it.
Thank you very much. I have no further speakers. We will now move to an electronic vote on the amendment. The amendment that was proposed by Councillor Annette Singer and seconded by Councillor Downs. Mr Snowden, would you like to take us through the voting, please?
Will members press the blue button to indicate they are present? Members in favour of the amendment, please press the green button marked plus. Members against the amendment, please press the red button marked minus. Members wishing to abstain, please press the yellow button marked with a cross. I am now closing the vote. Oh.
Two more people press present that haven't voted. One. I'm giving everybody the chance to vote. However, one person. All right, Mr Snowden, please vote.
I'm now closing the vote. The results, Chairman, are 53... Sorry. What the hell's going on? Sorry, I can't see the result. 17 in favour, 35 against.
Therefore, we have lost the amendment. We now move, thank you very much. We now go back to the original motion as proposed by Councillor Kavanagh, seconded by Councillor Jones. Sorry, I should have had my microphone on. The amendment has therefore been lost. We now go back to the original motion as proposed by Councillor Kavanagh and seconded by Councillor Jones. Do I have any speakers on the original motion? Councillor Kindersley. Sorry, Councillor Scout.
Thank you, Chair. The Labour Party actually did take an holistic approach to this question of schools and access. And way back before 2010, the Blair Labour government provided funding so that an officer was actually attached to the county council to negotiate with all the schools throughout the entirety of Cambridgeshire to go about the possibility of coming up with a plan to reduce this issue of driving children to school. And so it was a Cambridgeshire approach, and the officer was attached to the county council. So I raise that simply to respond to the concerns that have been expressed that the Labour group is taking a Cambridge City approach to this. The Labor Party approach was one of looking at the whole issue and taking a holistic approach. And the other point I would simply like to make is this, that on the 21st of July, the Greater Cambridge Partnership did have before it a city access plan. Now, when I raise the issue of city access, I do hope that everybody within the chamber will accept or realise that though it was a city access plan, it was really directed to the whole of Cambridgeshire, and that it could be expanded into that in terms of reducing pollution. And it again took a holistic approach to this question, recognising that the whole problem is not created by parents driving children to school, but there is this broader issue of looking at pollution and looking at congestion and endeavouring to deal with them on a Cambridgeshire approach and as an holistic approach. This is simply one measure in that program. Now, Councillor Bates, of course, who sadly is not here at the moment, was at that meeting, of course, because he is on the board of the Greater Cambridge Partnership, and he was taking a supportive approach to the issue of looking at pollution in this overall perspective.
I do apologise. I would say we've got a point of order, a point of clarification.
I'm a little bit worried about councillors quoting words of councillors who aren't here when there's somebody else that verifies them. I'm a little bit concerned that, you know, Councillor Bates isn't here to say whether it's in that, whether it's in context or not, so I'd rather...
Right. That's a fair comment.
I beg your pardon, and I do take that point. I was simply endeavouring to, not to lock him into any position, but simply saying that he, in my opinion, was recognising the holistic nature of the issue and the Cambridgeshire nature of the issue, and in my opinion, that was a laudable approach to take. And so I do acknowledge what Councillor Counter said. I simply conclude by saying this, that there's no way that this Labor group would believe that this motion is an answer to the entire problem, because the problem goes way beyond this, and that there is no intention on the part of the Labor group to target any part of the Cambridgeshire residents or the Cambridgeshire population or the Cambridgeshire demographic. We do recognise that there are issues in terms of people who are single parents needing to take their children to school. There are parents who have a child in one school and a child in another. They have a job. So we do take on board all of that. And the purpose of this amendment is to go forward in the whole recognition that A, it's a holistic approach that's needed, B, we recognise the concerns of those people and the needs of those people who are actually taking their children to school by this mode, and we would endorse an approach that ensures that public transport is properly available and that other measures are there, like was proposed with this officer who was negotiating with all the schools to come up with a solution that would be one that would adopt a holistic approach, reduce pollution, reduce congestion, and get children to school as they must, and parents to work as they must too. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Tierney.
Thank you, Chairman. If this motion had proposed that we use existing powers, but perhaps make it easier for schools to change the yellow lining outside of them if they haven't already got the appropriate yellow lining, I probably would have liked to support it. If this motion had talked about encouraging on working with the police to get them to commit more resources to looking at school in and out times to make sure that people park legally and safely, I probably would have been able to support it. And if this motion had talked about trying to encourage better school design so that it's easy to drive in and out of the school, to drop the children off without close proximity to the vehicles and in a safe way, I probably would have liked to support it. But what this motion seems to propose is the use of sneaky cameras to give tickets to hard-working, hard-pressed parents, and I will not support that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chairman. This is a bureaucratic nightmare as far as I'm concerned. Permits, ANPR cameras, traffic regulation orders, cost, officers, police time, all to take away people's personal freedoms and choices as to how they need to travel about. You know, I represent a lot of hard-working parents who are trying to keep their lives in balance. Work-life balance is really important. They've often got kids at different schools. This would force them to have to get up an hour earlier. They would have to park away from the zone. It would push the parking zones further out. That's what it would do. And just cause more difficulty for people. I think we need to ask ourselves what we would want the police to stop doing in order to police this activity. And for me, it's just taking away people's personal freedoms. I think there's an opportunity if this genuinely came from a community and it came from a school with this absolute support and clear, transparent support of the parents, and it was right for that particular school in that location, as seems to be the case in Histon. I heard a very compelling case on the radio this morning in Histon where they've really made this work because they've got local businesses that are used as car parks very nearby, and it absolutely works. If it's genuinely like that, I clearly would not get in the way of that activity, and I think that's what the Liberal Democrats were probably trying to say and do with their amendment. And I would totally support that, and if the police feel that they can resource that, I would support that too. I think this is about winning the hearts and minds of the community. This is very Cambridge-centric. There are areas in my district and county patches where this just absolutely wouldn't work, but I'm heartened by the Histon trial, and if it could come from the community, I would get behind that. So I think the way to deal with this is to more carefully look at this through our committee structure, as some of my colleagues have suggested earlier today, and to look at the homeschool travel plans where we could promote this as an option and let it come from the community.
Thank you. Councillor Kindersley.
Thank you, Chairman. In the course of the last couple of days, considering how I was going to vote on this, my view as late as this morning at our briefing was that actually this was in many ways profoundly imperfect as a motion, but it was a good start, and it was something that I would be quite happy to take out to all the schools in my division and say, you know, this is something that we're considering. This is, you know, what is your view? How do you see it working locally? And how would you like to get involved? But I have to say that the way the debate, both on the amendment and on this motion, have progressed, I don't really feel I am going to now vote in favour of this, and I shall probably abstain. For a lot of the reasons that have been rehearsed very clearly by most recently Councillor Bailey. There are, however, a couple of things that I, from my own perspective, really would want to highlight. I mean, the first is, of course, this is talking about schools in Cambridge. And, you know, one of the things over my years as a Cambridgeshire County Councillor that people have highlighted very often, particularly in this chamber, is, you know, it isn't all about Cambridge. It's about Cambridgeshire. And we do need to remember that, and we do need, clearly, some of us to be reminded of that from time to time. The second point that I wanted to raise in relation to this is examining what it is that, you know, the Labour motion actually is looking at. It's looking at reducing congestion, and it is looking at reducing air pollution. So I was quite surprised to find that they were proposing looking at primary schools. And I was further surprised on considering this that they had missed an opportunity to raise the red flag for socialism locally by not selecting 3 independent schools. Because the reality is that when it comes to cars, it's the independent schools that really are, or should be, at the top of the list. And it would have given the Labour group a marvellous opportunity to take forward the political battle that has been raging since, well, for at least, you know, some years, and now is back with Mr. Corbyn. So, all of those missed opportunities would seem to militate to me currently that I'm not going to support this, and I would perhaps urge Councillor Bailey and her colleagues to take this opportunity to actually see if there is some way that this authority can work with schools in villages, towns and cities of Cambridgeshire to, as you have pointed out, bring it from the ground up. Because, Chairman, you have schools in your division, and you will know just as well as the rest of us do, if it's not the will of the people, it isn't going to happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Sorry, Councillor Kavanagh. Point of
It's a point. It's obvious to me a number of speakers have said that the motion is just concentrating on Cambridge. But if people have read the motion properly, you'll see the last words of the motion say, and other towns in Cambridgeshire. So please read the motion before you stand up.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanagh. I have. Thank you, Councillor Jenkins.
I'd like to raise the point of personal explanation.
My legal person here will comment whether it is or not.
With the greatest of respect to Councillor Kavanagh, I did read the motion. It says 3 primary schools will initially be the subject of the trials for a period of 18 months. ... Other schools in Cambridge City and subsequently Cambridgeshire. So much as I would love to be lectured correctly by Councillor Kavanagh, that moment has yet to come.
Thank you, Chair. No, it's not a good motion. I struggle to support it. Through you, Chair, no, it's not. and the reasons why, summed up by our colleague from the North, Councillor Tierney there, well said. I couldn't have cut it better. But it's a vitally important issue. And we really do need to get pollution, air pollution, NOxes, particulates and stuff like that front of mind. Now, it's good that the County Council ran an event a couple of weeks ago, air quality learning and networking event up in Huntingdon, where it was looking at trends in pollution and the impact of pollution on the health of our society. And it is a scourge. We worry too much about obesity and heart disease and stuff like that. Pollution is something really, really serious. Lorna mentioned the tragic case of a child who died in London. That's the only one that's been identified. Ella Kissa Deborah lived off the South Circular Road. Spikes in her asthma corresponded to spikes in NOxes on the South Circular in those days. It is serious, and if she's one, you can bet there's 1,000 or 10,000 similar. So we've got to make this front of mind. And as is summarised in the paper, in the motion, through you, well done, Noel, yep, it's all about pollution, exercise, and reducing conflict at school gates. And that's positive. And as a bit of information, the exercise in Histon was purely about reducing conflict at the school gates, and it prohibits entry to a cul-de-sac. So it's not really the sort of model for what, through you, Noel is proposing here today. There are many other things that this council can do, and the partners with whom it works. Just last week, we started prevaricating again about bikeability. You know, do we want to spend money on something which makes it safer for kids to cycle to school? Do we want to save the life of a kid occasionally? Well, only if somebody else will pay for it. No, let's get real. Let's pay for bikeability. If kids are cycling to school, their parents are not driving them in their diesel-polluting cars. The other thing that's interesting to have a look at is our planning system and our new communities. Doesn't help the existing schools, I know, but recent examples. Orchard Park, the school is at one end of a long community. So it's 1.5 kilometres, 2 kilometres for some people to walk. Coincidentally, that's the social housing down that end, of course, So who's being disadvantaged? We should be putting schools in the centre of the community. Alconbury, where some people think this chamber is going to relocate to, the primary school is at the bottom end of the community, not in the centre. We heard this week that the plans for Waterbeach will stick a school on the edge of the community, slap bang against the A10 and the roundabout. Can you imagine a worse place to put a primary school if you want to shield it from pollution? Now, it is said, of course, that developers don't want to put schools in the centre because that's the prime land and they'd rather sell that off for housing. Yeah, I accept that. We've got to find a way around it. Eddington has the primary school in the right place. It'll be interesting to look at the developments that this land gets involved in to see whether it's willing to put the primary schools in the centre of the community or if it decides it would rather sell its houses for a higher price than secure the health of our children for the future. Think of Ella Kisser-Deborah when you vote. Chair, I might well vote for this because it's a signal that this is such an important issue. We've got to move it forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jenkins. Councillor Shellings.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. 2 quick points. First of all, I'm a numbers person and I would really like to know what the pollution levels are in the proximity of schools under consideration. Second point, a resident approached me and asked why his car should be banned around...
Councillor Shellings, I believe, who did you just raise? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The second point, a resident approached me and asked why his car should be banned around the local school when he drives an electric car. I could not think of an answer. Perhaps Councillor Kavanagh could help me with that.
Thank you. Councillor Giles.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I have a bit of a problem with this motion as it stands, and I do take the point that, through you, Chair, Councillor Kavanagh, you did mention Cambridgeshire at the end. But the division I represent, we have 2 schools. One is right next door to the A1, which could cause a little bit of problem if at school time you're going to block off permit holders only going down the A1. So that's one of the problems I have. The other one, the other school has had serious problems with parking, etc. We've done the yellow lines, we've got all the things we can possibly do. But even if we started monitoring and allowing certain people through past the school at certain times, it would just not work. Mainly because it's on the main road, going from there to there. So it is a bit of a problem, and I won't be supporting this. However, I do think that the whole issue is good that it's been brought up to this council, because I think it is an issue, and I think that we should deal with this issue. However, this motion doesn't deal with the whole holistic approach to it. And, excuse me, Councillor Kindersley briefly alluded to the suggestion, and I will reinforce that, and it gives the opportunity for the ruling group to take control of this issue and perhaps pass it to a relevant committee for further investigation, because I think that is what is needed in this. As responsible councillors, I would most certainly support that, and I dare say most other councillors, including perhaps Councillor Kavanagh, would also support that. But I'm not in a position to push that forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Giles. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I too would like to thank Councillor Kavanagh for bringing this motion and bringing up the issue of excessive cars around schools. I'm in the next door division in Cambridge to Councillor Kavanagh's in Queen Edith, and we have similar problems. Not surprisingly, I have 6 schools in my divisions. There's 4 that are state schools and 2 that are private schools, and I'd agree that we get more traffic from the private schools, but the driving practices are bad, whatever sort of school it is. So I share his concerns about the air quality and the fact that we need to do something to get more children walking and cycling to school for the sake of their health and their future health. And who knows, if we bring up children who are not obese, and if they're fitter and stronger, maybe that World Cup will come home in 10 years' time. So that could be good news for all of us too. But apart from the air quality issues and the health issues, the problems that people come to me about a lot are the antisocial nature of the driving, the parking around the school. There's people driving over the pavement when there's kids walking on the pavements, and when they've dropped their kids off, then they speed off to get to work or wherever they're going afterwards. So they're in danger not just of perhaps long-term illness or death through poor air quality in the longer term. In the shorter term, they're at danger of being run over and injured. Councillor Tierney mentioned that these matters could be addressed by yellow paint. I spend a lot of time addressing it with yellow paints. We have school zigzags and yellow lines, but unfortunately those are not complied with by a lot of the people coming to the schools, and the police are nowhere to be seen. They regard it as something where councillors have to put down physical measures to stop parking around schools, and they tell us that they don't have time to enforce it because they're too busy with other issues. So, although others have outlined some of the reservations about this motion, but I'm glad that we are discussing it, and I would support the council taking further work on it. It would be important if we had a no-car zone around the school to consider the displacement issues, because that parking and driving would take place somewhere else, not far away. And it's also essential that the schools are involved. I was pleased to hear Councillor Kavanagh say that he had talked to some of the schools in particular areas. That would be a must. And also the residents of the areas where the schools are, because they're the ones who are breathing in the air even more than the children and the parents who visit every day. So we'd want to look at potential unintended consequences, the schools in the areas and the residents in the areas, and I hope that the council will look into this to ensure road safety for the kids attending our schools. Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Machini.
Thank you, Chair. I am a little bit sad, really, because I think, none of us in this group think that this motion is going to solve congestion, but we have really got an opportunity to shine a light on the other things that this motion might perhaps put in place. We have got a community transport review going on. We've got a bus transport review going on. We have a combined authority who in 2 years, quite frankly, for the residents of the county in transport has not done enough. And when this actually would, since the mayor has been in place, but when this actually would potentially put in place a situation where parents actually have more of a choice in using community transport to get their children to school, I don't think this has been given enough space and enough discussion. So, Councillor Bailey has mentioned choices. Where are the choices of those people that have been waiting to use the bus to take their children to school and can't? But thank you.
And your microphone, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'd like to thank Councillor Kavanagh for raising the issue. We all agree here today that the health and well-being of our children is paramount. There's 2 points I want to make. One is on this misrepresentation of this motion, as though it's some sort of imposition. It's a trial. Local councillors, as my colleague earlier indicated, would consult with schools. So I think there's, definitely a misrepresentation of the motion. And secondly, I'd like to bring up the point about the holistic approach. There's often a lack of acknowledgement that people are struggling economically in Cambridge, and they are. Councillor Kavanagh does indicate it's a Cambridgeshire-wide approach, but I would also like to make the point. Having been a single parent and actually being lucky enough to have a school that started at 8:40 and having to get to work by 9 a.m, I'm very aware of the issues. But a holistic approach is the way forward. Affordable childcare before and after school so that parents can make absolutely genuine choices would be part of a holistic approach in my view. Cuts in public transport, the fact that parents can't always access a school close by seem to me all part of a need for a holistic approach to look at this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Schumann.
Thank you, Chairman. This motion has a lot of merit, and I think we've heard about it, and I think we're all in agreement there's some merit in what's been proposed today, but it's got great big holes in it as well, and they've been well identified by many members here today. And earlier today, in the debate, Councillor Bailey and consequently Councillor Kindersley and more latterly Councillor Giles have all suggested that this perhaps needs to go to the relevant committee. And I have the benefit of sitting next to the Chairman of Children and Young People's and the Chairman of Highways, who I'm sure can liaise with one another, and Councillor Bywater has committed to liaising with Councillor Shooter and decide where this can go to be discussed fully and look at how we can either include it in the home to school transport plans, which Councillor Bailey mentioned, or wherever else we can promote it to schools as an option that might be appropriate for some communities or some schools, along with all of the other options, some of which have been suggested by Councillor Tierney. And at that point, and I lead on from Councillor Shelling's point, we can get a little bit more detail about what the actual implications of some of these schemes would be, and we can consider them fully. Chairman, I think we only have 2 more speakers. I was going to suggest we put it to the vote, but considering that the lead is the second speaker to speak, I'll let him suggest such a thing.
Councillor Topping.
Thank you, Chair. It's always difficult for a well-meaning councillor such as Councillor Kavanagh to know which side of the detail he should err on. And if he puts forward a sort of vague proposition, then it can easily be shot down by the naysayers as being unworkable and unthought through. And if he goes with too much detail, as I fear he has done here, then he's derided as a sort of political commissar, interfering and overly didactic. I would say there do seem to be quite a lot of permits that would have to be applied for in this proposition. One point to bear in mind is that some parents do believe that it is their duty to deliver their children to the door of the school and no further away. And that is something that would need to be taken into account in working this through. So my own position is, while I regret that I won't be supporting Councillor Kavanagh's motion, I do thank him for the thoughts, and I will be trying to take them forward with the schools in my own villages. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kemp.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Rather than reiterate a number of the issues with this, or indeed the merits, which there are many of this, I'm just going to concentrate on where we go next after the vote. Councillor Schumann has already alluded to the fact that we've had discussions and we see a lot of merit in this report and shining a bright light onto it to see what can be done. But the one thing that we've discovered during this debate today and during our earlier conversations is the variance in the schools, the variance in the communities, the variance in the peoples that attend those schools, whether they're on cul-de-sacs, whether they have a red line car park that they can use nearby, whether they're on a through route, whether there's an appetite from the children, whether the catchment area is nearby or actually quite distant or dangerous. And it's that variance that makes this wrong to be a top-down approach. And both the original motion, which dictated officers to identify which schools to put in the thing, and the amendment which identified the police, which gave them the responsibility for deciding whether it could go ahead, is simply the wrong way. The way forward on this is to invite the schools and the communities to come together and look, with councillors' help, at what they can do in their local area, what works for them and what they want to bring forward. And for our role in this, as we've spoken about earlier, is not to say no. Our role here is if a community wants it, and it starts getting some credibility, and if there's revenue involved, where that's going to come from, whether the police have buy-in, and start lining those things up, and then maybe we can deliver some areas for trials that could then be examples for elsewhere. But it's got to be community driven, because we are too different in this aspect to be driven by a top down. And that is the reason that I started off very early on saying that, you know, I like the ideas of cutting congestion. I like the ideas of improving safety. I like the ideas of reducing air pollution, but it's the wrong way to go about it, both this and the amendment. So I'm sorry I've got to vote against this. However, I must thank you, Councillor Kavanagh, for highlighting this today. It has got a lot of people talking. It has got a lot of people thinking about the subject, and we're all aligned on the outcomes, but I think we now need to try a different journey to get there. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Dowd. Councillor Schumann, do you have a point of order? Sorry, carry on.
Chairman, if I may, I've had a few members asking if I made a formal proposal to bring it to committee, and although it wasn't a formal proposal, it was a commitment which I'm sure would be minuted and noted that the chairman will take it away. But I've had a few members asking for clarity, so I just wish to be clear that I didn't make a formal proposal, but a commitment to do so.
What about Councillor Downs?
Well, what's the point of order? Just following on from Councillor Schumann.
Councillor Dowd.
Well, I just wanted to take up Councillor Count's point. We all agree it's an important issue. What I'm afraid of is if we reject the motion, it will just get shelved like everything else. Now, can you give an undertaking that you will take up Josh Schumann's idea and advise your two chairmen, because you're in charge? Can we rely on you to make sure that those two committees take it?
I think it has been raised.
I mean, if in practical terms we can do it that way, it will all have been worthwhile. If we go on for hours and hours nitpicking and so on, we're wasting our time. It's important. It must go forward in some way.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Dowd. Councillor Manning, quickly.
An actual point of order, Chair. Under 11D of the Constitution, and I'm hoping I get a seconder here, I'd like to propose that we make a referral to the appropriate committee for this motion. And I'm hoping that's something that could get the whole chamber, so we're not voting for the motion, we've been making a referral to either the Children's Committee or, as Councillor Schumann would like to suggest, a different committee. I'd be happy with whatever committee.
Okay, that appears that is allowed.
I need a seconder for that. I don't know if Councillor Kavanagh would like to second it as the proposed with the motion. This is his motion.
Well, yes, actually, that's what I was hoping to stand up and propose.
Yeah, I was worried it wouldn't happen.
But I'm not open.
Just refer it.
Yes, I know. Basically, we have now had a proposal. We've now had a proposal. We've had it seconded in the middle of the debate about the motion. So we will take this proposal that's been put forward, and that is to say, so it has been seconded. Does anybody wish to know what it is?
Which body?
So I'd suggest that it goes with the agreement of the chair of the Children's Committee. I'm looking to the chair to sort of give me a nod. Or I'm sorry to put you under pressure, but
I think basically it's better that both chairs have heard the debate. They actually talk to each other and get put on their relevant committee.
I'm perfectly happy with that as long as we end up with a referral under 11D rather than voting.
You still want that, right? So I have two new speakers now. We have Councillor Count and Councillor Jones, and this is on the proposal that has just been put forward. We're now sort of parking the actual motions. So Councillor Count, this is on the proposal.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So the first thing that I'm against, and absolutely against, is referring this motion to the committee. This motion is fatally flawed below the waterline. All right? What I am suggesting, and what Councillor Schumann has already said, is this subject matter goes forward to the agenda of a committee, and we'll put it on there. Now, if everybody's happy with that, Councillor Downs asked for a personal commitment. You already had it from a committee chair that this is how we were going to go about it, and actually describing me as somehow the boss and being in charge rather overestimates my influence. So take Councillor Schuman's word for it. We will get this on the agenda plan, but we'll put it in a format that we can actually discuss and debate this rationally, but not the motion, Madam Chairman.
Okay.
That was not.
Are you happy with that as a way forward? So you're happy that it will go forward? Brilliant. See, all working together. Councillor Jones.
Thank you. As my colleagues on the Health Committee will know, this is a major issue in terms of health. Children have
Actually, can I actually stop you? Basically, we are now back talking about the motion.
I am talking about
Yeah, I'm just checking. Basically, this is your right to...
Sorry, I wasn't talking about the motion. I was actually talking about the referral.
The referral has been sorted out now. That's going back. They're going to sort it out for
something
themselves.
on the referral.
Sorry?
Which is why I pressed the button. I wanted to add something on the referral. Because you've assumed it's going only to the Children and Young People Committee. No, you have assumed it's going to the Children and Young People Committee. What I wanted to say was that I think the Health Committee
No, I don't think we
needs
did.
to be involved too, because this is a public health issue.
Right, okay. It's not been assumed. Everybody's going to talk to each other and basically get it to the relevant committee. That is what is going to happen. Okay? Whether the Health Committee want to get involved, that's up to that chairman. Thank you for bringing that up. We've now finished with that item. Councillor Manning's happy. We're now going back to the motion on its own, right? So now you have a right to speak for as you seconded the motion. Councillor Kavanagh will then sum up on the motion. We will then go to an electronic vote on the motion itself, okay?
To be involved. Okay.
You press me.
I pressed you. No, Peter did. Anyway. Right, okay. What I want to do is to cut through all the... I was going to say dross, but that's a bit unfair. But cut means warm support, but lots and lots of critical comment. I want to cut through that and say, what is this motion actually saying? Councillor Count said it was a top-down approach, but if you read the final paragraph, what it says is, we will work through consent, we will work with councillors and local schools, we will trial it in 3 schools, we will trial it for a period. If it doesn't work, you pull back. It doesn't necessarily follow that the whole thing will work across Cambridgeshire. So the whole discussion about exceptions and people who couldn't do it is irrelevant in this situation. The other thing we need to think about is that we are here as councillors to lead opinion. Okay? We know on the Health Committee, and the Health Committee has largely been supportive, we know that this is a major public health issue. Children's lung capacity is smaller. They get out of the cars by the school gates, they run in, they're breathing in noxious fumes, NOx, particulates. We know the growth of asthma, we know the growth of a whole range of childhood diseases, but it also affects the development of the whole cardiovascular system. So we know it's a real danger, okay? Now, what this is proposing is that, okay, we find 3 schools, initially in Cambridge, 3 schools for a trial period. In my division, I have 3,000 school children arriving in my division to schools. Primary and secondary schools, state schools and independent schools. It generates 30% of the traffic. It generates about 15% of the fumes around the schools. It's a pretty awful situation. My residents' associations and myself have been working for quite a long time, before I was a councillor even, to try and work with the schools, to get the schools to find a way forward. They have got travel plans. Councillor Bailey mentioned home-to-school travel plans. They've done the travel plans. They've done the minibuses. But you still get parents, a lot of parents, who double and triple park, who park on the zigzags, who park on double lines, who don't actually care at all about anybody else. Now, finding 3 schools who can exemplify how it might be different, how it might actually work in a different way. Surely that is a commendable thing to do. And if we do that, we are then brave councillors saying, let us set the agenda for public health. Let us set the agenda for our children growing up. So I find it very depressing that all that people can think about are the acceptance of the problems, and not that this is a small scheme based on consultation, and only after consultation will we go forward. I do ask you to support this motion.
Councillor Kavanagh, if you would like to sum up, we will then move.
Great. Yeah, well, I'll be very brief. One of my backgrounds was in marketing and sales, and I know when to close this sale. I just thank everyone in the chamber for all their comments and their support on this issue. Yes, there may have been one or two problems with the wording and so on of the actual motion. Next time, I'll produce a tome for you all to read. I'm sure you're all going to look forward to it. So I'm really pleased that the issue is going to go forward to an appropriate committee, because we've all agreed here that this is an aspect of our lives that has to be addressed. And we, as responsible councillors, as we do with all our work, we take our local residents first. And I'm very pleased for all the supporting comments that came out. And yes, I've got a sense this motion will not get passed, but I don't think I will be as disappointed as I was when England didn't make it to the World Cup final. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanagh. Let's take us through the voting on the motion as proposed by Councillor Kavanagh, seconded by Councillor Jones.
Would members please press the blue button to indicate they are present? Members in favour of the motion, please press the green button marked plus. Members against the motion, please press the red button marked minus. Members wishing to abstain, please press the yellow button marked with the cross. Chairman, I'm now closing the vote. The results are 13 in favour, 33 against and 8 abstentions.
Therefore, the motion is lost.
Chairman.
Councillor Harrison.
Thank you. I'd like to raise a point of order. And I'm sorry to have to do this because I recognise that, anyway, there are some in the chamber who don't much like due process. But three things have concerned me this morning about sort of mythologies that I suspect are going to grow up unless they're challenged. And I think they're very important because this is the Council's primary debating chamber. And debate must be allowed to go on here. And it must be allowed to go on without being belittled or without being attempted to be ruled out of order without advice from the monitoring officer and so on. So the three things that have occurred is one, that in an earlier item, the leader implied that unless something was phrased in the form of a question to him in an issue, that there was no need for the debate, that the debate was unimportant. And I'd like the monitoring officer to rule on that as a point of order, Chair, please. I would also like the monitoring officer to report, to comment or advise as to whether or not it is correct that nobody in this chamber must refer to the words of another member who is not present, who has chosen not to be present for this meeting or for any meeting. It seems to me that this would shut down debate in a very, very serious way to all our detriment and disadvantage. And I need to go on with my third point, and that is about the issue about whether it is proper or worthy of debate if a motion applies only to one part of this council's geographic area. I find that quite extraordinary. It would seem to me to be perfectly reasonable for anybody in this chamber to bring a motion which relates to Soham, St Ives, Wisbech, Chatterley, anything else on all of the issues that there are. And I fail to understand in what way it is regarded as something to close down debate where this is about something to do with Cambridgeshire.
Right,
I've got three questions for the monitoring officer.
No, hang on, right. Basically, if I can hang on, I can understand this is going to a whole new ball game. You have raised issues. I'm not going to ask them on because I want to move on. You have raised, if you can put them down in an email, the monitoring officer will come back to you. We'll move forward because I'm going to start a whole new load of points of order. Let's move on. That concludes discussion of the first motion. We now move to the second motion submitted by Councillor Amanda Taylor. Can I ask Councillor Amanda Taylor to move and speak to her motion as set out on pages 3 and 4 of the Council agenda? Councillor Taylor, I believe you have an alteration to your motion to add relevant to the first bullet on page 4 before the word staff. Can I ask for the meeting of consent for this minor change? Okay. Councillor Taylor, would you like to move and speak to your motion and tell me who your seconder is? And I do know that you've got 3 guests who have come in to hear the debate for this item, who I did have the privilege to meet earlier. Councillor Taylor.
Councillor Bailey has offered to second our motion.
I would like to speak of Councillor Taylor.
Thank you. I'd like to start by welcoming our visitors from the Cambridgeshire Motor Neurone Disease Association, Fred Smith, Sue Halifax and Simon Crook. Good to have you here with us today. I met Fred when I was canvassing in Dunstan Court, which is a sheltered housing complex in Queen Edith's. Fred invited me in to his flat to have a chat, and he explained about the Motor Neurone Disease Charter, and he told me about how he had sadly lost his wife to MND. Since that time, he's been volunteering with the association. He's a visitor with them and supports people who are living with MND and their families and friends. So he's a link person, rather like councillors, liaising between different people and agencies. Fred told me about the charter, but first he told me about MND and how it affects people. It attacks the motor neurons that send messages from the brains to the muscles, so that if you have it, you can't walk, can't talk, and cannot feed yourself. It affects only about 5,000 people in the UK, and that's a relatively small number, meaning that care professionals aren't always familiar with how serious the condition is or exactly what people need. And it progresses brutally fast and kills a third of people who have it within 12 months of diagnosis, and over half of them within 2 years. And it's because people's health goes downhill so quickly that their needs also change very rapidly, which is why they need early diagnosis and care packages to be in place as soon as possible. It is dreadful enough for somebody to know that they don't have very long to live, but it's absolutely vital that they're supported in their needs as well as possible. As it was explained to me by the association, that means having the right care in the right place at the right time. After I told Fred I'd be willing to bring the motion to council, he introduced me to other people from the local MNDA, including people involved in a clinic in Cambridge. And our conversation brought it home to me just how many council functions serve people with MND. There's the obvious ones such as social care and carer support, but also things to do with our transport and highways. Now, as a council, we sadly can't do anything to stop the progress of a disease like motor neurone disease. But if somebody is suffering with us, with it, then we can do our best to improve the quality of their life. And the Charter's calling for 5 things, which are listed on page 3 of your agenda papers, which I'm sure you've all read. And from conversations with our officers in the care sector, I was very heartened to learn that the council is already doing very well on all 5 of these rights. But the Charter would be a positive move in that we could build on them. For example, information and signposting could be enhanced by being made MND specific. We could give a special focus on MND in the new carer service specification which is being worked up. And above all, there'd be an opportunity for the council to build strong links with the association in other areas that have already adopted the Charter, and that's over 70 authorities. The association is providing briefing and training for council staff, health professionals and care agencies in awareness about the condition. So the partnership has a real opportunity to deliver improvements to the lives of people with MND and their families and carers. It's already been adopted by over 70 councils in the UK, including Peterborough, and it's had support from national organisations like the Royal College of GPs, the Royal College of Nursing, and prominent individuals too, such as Terence Higgins and Professor Stephen Hawking, who, as you'll be aware, was a sufferer himself. So for Cambridgeshire to adopt the Charter today would be a positive move for the council and for people living with the illness and their carers, as well as an affirmation of all the people who haven't struggled with the illness in the past. And I would like to commend the motion to the council, and I hope you'll all support it.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you to Councillor Taylor for accepting a very minor amendment that we wanted to put forward, and also for giving us the opportunity to second your motion. It's much appreciated. And I'd like to thank the residents that have come here today and the Motor Neurons Disease Association for bringing it to our attention, and very important charter. Clearly a huge amount of work and effort and energy has gone into putting it together. I'd like to, though, in standing today, just recognise that there are other illnesses that are equally important, and this is not to undervalue other conditions and illnesses that this council supports, and that these values should absolutely apply to everybody and do. However, as Councillor Taylor has pointed out, 30% of people with motor neurons disease die within 12 months of diagnosis. It is a truly devastating illness and diagnosis to receive. And I think that this council has a crucial part to play in recognising when that happens, the support that needs to be carried out in a very timely fashion. And I think that's an area that we will want to look at. We're already, as Councillor Taylor has said, we're already doing a lot of what the Charter talks about already. I have no doubt absolutely that we can be doing it better, and that when a resident comes forward with motor neurons disease, we will have increased awareness across the council to be able to make absolutely sure, and it's right that the small number of people that are suffering from it get timely support, and that's what's critical, I think. And also that they know what they can expect by the council having adopted this charter, and they know what they can ask for and expect to happen, and that we can be held to account on that. I think the health interventions around this are absolutely critical, and our health partners play a vital part in this. We don't have control over our health partners, but we certainly have the ability to influence the way that they behave, and we can look to do that. Timely diagnosis is clearly critically important and not something that is in the direct control of this council. However, we have under our health committee the powers to scrutinise the NHS and our local health services, and I think that this is something that the chairman of the health committee would like to look at, and is happy to think about how we can ask the NHS what they do in order to make sure that the charter is supported throughout the system, and that things feel like they're joined up, and that you're not fighting a whole load of bureaucracy the minute that this happens to you. I know that that is a huge frustration, and it's the last thing that anybody needs when they receive this diagnosis. So I think, thank you for Councillor Taylor for listening to residents and putting this forward, and I think all councillors have a part to play in making this a reality for people when they need our support.
Thank you. Councillor Hudson.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to really thank you, Amanda, for bringing this forward. It's a really good motion. And thank you for your previous emails on this. And I'd just like to confirm what Councillor Bailey has said, that the Health Committee will place on this forward agenda plan a scrutiny item to call in the local NHS and health providers to discuss the services provided for this.
Thank you. Sorry? Oh, there. I didn't see you.
Just very quickly, I hadn't pressed the button because I had assumed that somebody else would. I would also like to express my thanks to Amanda for bringing this forward. I think it's a really important charter, and I think it's really valuable for all of us to do this. I'd like to echo what Councillor Bailey had to say about the importance of recognising that there are many other types of diseases, and that for all of those types of diseases, it is actually really important that this council has an understanding of the progression of the disease, because it has a huge impact on the way those families will need to be supported. My godmother has muscular dystrophy, which has a much slower progression, and understanding whether you're trying to support somebody with a disease which is changing very quickly, or something that's changing very slowly, and you're going to need to build up packages of care that are going to have to last for a long time. Just the understanding of those different patterns, I think, is very, very important for the families to have that. So I'm sure we will all be supporting this, and I'd like to thank both Fred and the other members for coming. And I think that just to say that this particular, understanding this disease better is helpful for us today, and we also need to make the same kind of progress in other areas. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor, do you wish to sum up? I will then go to a show of hands for the voting, because everybody seems in favour. Councillor Taylor. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry.
Not much remains for me to say, but to thank other members of the council for their support and for their astute comments about how we might take this forward via our various committees, and the action plan mentioned in here. And in response to Councillor Bailey's point about other people that we work with, yes, it's important that things work for everybody, but I would like to think that if we get things right for the motor neurone disease sufferers, then it will help us to get it right for everybody too. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Taylor. I will now take the vote by acclamation, if that's all right with everybody. Those in favour? I think we can say that's unanimous, but I will. Any against? Any abstentions? Thank you very much. Thank you. That concludes the discussion of the motion. Next is item 8, questions. 8A, Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority and Overview. I'll start again. Next we will consider item 8A, Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority and Overview and Scrutiny Committee oral questions, which will be dealt with in accordance with the protocol set out in Annex 1 of Part 4.1, Council Procedure Rules of the Council's Constitution. The generic report summarising the decisions made by the combined authorities of formal committees is included on the Council agenda on pages 5 to 28. The deadline for submitting questions was Tuesday the 10th of July. I have received 3 questions for Council Account, the Council's representative on the combined authority. Sorry, 2 questions, I read that wrong. Sorry, 2, I do apologise, and I'm a bookkeeper. The Council's representative on the combined authority from Councillors Harrison and Bradnam. Could I please ask Councillor Harrison to ask her question to Council Account? You have 2 minutes.
Council Account supported the Mayor's... At the Combined Authority Board meeting on the 30th of May, Council Account supported the Mayor's proposal to pause key elements of the Greater Cambridge Partnership's transport programme, a move opposed by the 2 GCP partners, the City Council and South Cambs Council. Would Councillor Account assure me that in future he will use his influence and his vote to enable the Greater Cambridge Partnership to resume work on all the paused projects?
Right, Council Account, you have 2 minutes to respond.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Harrison, for your question. The purpose of the pause was to determine whether all GCP whether those programmes are aligned to more emerging long-term, strategic long-term aims of the Transport Authority, which is, of course, the Combined Authority. That pause has enabled workshops to take place to examine in more detailed proposals, those proposals. For example, those projects which include tunnelling in Cambridge City, which the Mayor has been promoting since before his election, and the Cam Metro. And those workshops have demonstrated there is a good deal of alignment, but also areas where incompatibilities mean further work is needed. The final stages of this work are still to conclude, and county officers are working hard with the Combined Authority on these points. It is intended that the results of this work will be reported to the Combined Authority Board at the end of this month. I'm sorry, I cannot agree to use my influence and vote to resume work on all of the paused projects as you request. For example, one area of outstanding contention is congestion charging, which the Liberal Democrats are intent on driving forward. I am fully of the opinion that this is wrong at the present time and should not be pursued until all other options are exhausted. For the Liberal Democrats to force people off the road through taxation before an acceptable alternative public transport system is in place is folly. This will unfairly impact on the lowest paid in our society. So instead of agreeing with your plans, which disproportionately affect the most financially disadvantaged, I instead ask that you use your influence and your votes within the Liberal Democrat group to get them to abandon their plans to introduce congestion charging in Cambridge.
Thank you. Councillor Harrison, you have 1 minute for a supplementary question.
Well, I mean, what an extraordinary outburst and what a revealing answer. Much more interesting than I would have thought it would have been, actually. An outburst against a party policy that doesn't exist. Of course, everybody in this chamber and many other places in the county know that I personally have been a proponent of road pricing because of the enormous benefits that it can bring to the very poorest in our society, amongst others, and for society as a whole. But this is not a party policy, and so I think Councillor Count yet again shows his willingness really to abuse the processes of this debating chamber, to imply and infer things that are not true. Nevertheless, he will find me to continue to champion this idea. But I think most revealing of all is that he is so clearly sided, isn't he, with the mayor? So clearly sided with the broader geography of the mayoral or of the combined authority against the interests of the GCP. That is very revealing. Thanks ever so much for the answer.
Thank you very much. Councillor Count, you do have 2 minutes to respond if you wish. I don't think that was a question, that was just... no.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think I can elucidate on the part of this at least. I mean, the only Liberal Democrat on the Combined Authority Board is Bridget Smith, the leader of South Cambridgeshire, and she lambasted me for opposing congestion charging. So, excuse me for assuming that the Liberal Democrat spokesperson and representative actually represented Liberal Democrat views.
I wish to raise a point of order.
Quickly, because then we are literally moving on.
I'll take as long as it takes to raise the point of order.
Hang on.
Chairman, earlier on in this meeting, we were prevented from discussing comments made by Councillor Bates, who actually belongs to this authority. So how come Councillor Count gets to make comments about Councillor Bridget Smith, who doesn't belong to this authority, in this chamber?
All right.
It seems to be double standards, Chairman, double standards.
I was actually trying to calm it all down. We are moving on. Okay. You're not getting a move. You're not. That's it. We're moving on. Right. Councillor Bradnam, can I please ask you to answer your question?
Thank you. Please could the Leader of the Council explain what he thinks the impact will be on the local councils who are in the process of managing complex planning applications of the Mayor's interim transport statement, which asked for a pause on all work relating to busways and park and ride sites. South Cambridgeshire District Council are in complex negotiations regarding a large development in Waterbeach. Such negotiations must be based on a valid local transport plan, and our current local transport plan, agreed by the Mayor and the Combined Authority only last year, is based on much improved bus access to the city using park and ride bus schemes. And bus schemes. There are no proposals, as far as I know, for the Cam Metro to serve the new development at Waterbeach. Without the improved bus service in the current local transport plan, how does the Mayor propose to ensure that there is high-quality public transport from Waterbeach into Cambridge?
Thank you for your question. Councillor Count, you have 2 minutes to respond.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you, Councillor Bradnam, for the question. I'm pleased to inform you that much of the work to date has determined how these things will be fully aligned. The result on paper comes out at the end of the month, and all areas will be fleshed out more fully. I would hope that you agree that desire for a world-class public transport system can allow for a small pause now, particularly if that can be recovered later on. This pause is temporary by nature, and a number of positives from that workshop are already emerging, such as accelerated delivery in some cases and defined savings to the work programme. With regards to specific proposals, there is a valid transport plan in place, and our officers, our highway officers, are perfectly situated to offer highways advice to planning teams, departments and committees on any potential adjustments and their results in the short, medium and longer term. I appreciate that when anyone looks at a piece of paper involving a housing infrastructure, a large-scale development, you imagine the results of that housing as a finished product, X thousand houses, and look at the shortfall in the present-day infrastructure, and therefore have serious concerns. However, it takes decades to build these complex sites, so our officers can provide much more nuanced and not knee-jerk reactions to these changes over where the matching comes over a period of time. And that can lead to statutory, obviously we have a right, statutory consultee comments on what level of housing is and is not appropriate with the infrastructure in place at any point in time. Now, thankfully, we now have a mayor, we have a combined authority, and we have end of sentence, Madam Chairman, if I may. We have a mayor, a combined authority, and £600 million to start to address the current shortfall, something which I may wish to remind the Liberal Democrats voted repeatedly against.
Thank you. Councillor Bradham, you do have a right to supplementary question.
Thank you. I think my observation about that is, thank you, Councillor Count, but my observation is that you've said that we tend to look at these projects as a finished product, but of course we who experience every day the problems of the A10 between Ely and Cambridge and indeed further north than there know that the A10 is almost currently already at capacity, and even the initial study done by this county council identified that the A10 is already at capacity, certainly at certain times of day. I think our major concern was simply that the delay might actually cause the local plan inspector to reconsider whether our local plan was going to be sound or not. And that was our concern, that the delay might actually cause a delay or a stopping of our local plan being adopted.
Thank you. Councillor Count, you do have 2 minutes to respond.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. Very simply, at the end of the day, this delay is not about taking away public transport options for the future or somehow harming the work that's in progress. This is actually about having a vision to deliver a much better solution in the short, medium and longer term. And those officers from the GCP, from the Combined Authority, from the County Council, are all sitting together, matching up the timescales against the delivery scales for all of the different proposals to see which route gets us to the best system in the most appropriate time. Now, I think the total time delay is about 6 weeks or something by the end of the month. It may be slightly different to that. So taking that time to pause and make sure that they're all correct, I think is the right thing to do. But at the end of the day, the Combined Authority, the Mayor, the County Council, all of us actually have to deliver those transport solutions. Nobody's saying, let's diminish this, let's take away what's already done. People are saying, actually, how do we get the very best for this area and how do we go about that? I think you would be pleased to know that the officers have worked very, very hard at delivering the right outcomes, and by the end of this month, you'll be able to fully read it, and then we can all take some comfort from the direction of travel.
Thank you. I have received 1 question for Councillor Netsinger and 1 question for Councillor Connor, the Council's representatives on the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, from Councillors Downs and Giles, respectively. Could I please ask Councillor Downs to ask his question of Councillor Netsinger? You have 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. I note from the minutes on page 17 that Councillor Netsinger has been elected as Chairman of the Scrutiny Panel. Congratulations. Thank you for being willing to take that on. I know from personal experience that being a scrutiny chairman is not an easy task, but thank you for being willing. My question is this. What barriers, if any, does the Scrutiny Committee face in trying to hold the Mayor and the Combined Authority to account?
Thank you. Councillor Netsinger.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Having been on the Combined Authority Scrutiny Committee for the past year, I believe there are some very significant concerns about how scrutiny is working, which relate to the way in which the Combined Authority itself is working. One of the most crucial requirements for a strong and robust scrutiny is clear lines of responsibility and transparent papers. The regular changes to the portfolio holders over the past year has made holding Combined Authority members accountable for the work and direction of the Combined Authority extremely difficult. The committee invited the portfolio members to come to the committee to discuss their areas of responsibility during the past year, but the level of detail portfolio holders were able to answer on and were able to give was very disappointing. I will say that Councillor Count is an honourable exception in this concern, as he has remained the portfolio holder for finance during the year, and he did bring detailed papers for the Scrutiny Committee to examine. Some of the changes to portfolio holders have been as a result of outside changes, outside the control of the Mayor. But the Mayor himself has also moved portfolio holders around with little or no explanation. At our last meeting, we asked these questions of the Mayor, and he recognised our concerns, and I believe that there is a paper reviewing governance coming to the next meeting of the Combined Authority. The Scrutiny Committee will examine this at its next meeting on Monday. I don't yet know whether the changes being proposed will improve the situation, and I have some concerns about whether they will in fact make it even less clear who is responsible for what in the Combined Authority. But it is certainly the case that the current situation has been very unsatisfactory. There have also been and continue to be issues about the level of detail in the papers presented to the Scrutiny Committee, and in particular the clarity of the financial papers. The medium-term financial plan presented to the Scrutiny Committee at our last meeting was very unclear about which of the projects which the Combined Authority has ambitions to take forward actually have funding and which ones are simply aspirations. The 2030 vision is also unclear about where funding for many of the proposals is coming from and how much of the funding is Combined Authority money.
You are out of time.
Fine. Those are some barriers.
Thank you. Councillor Downs, you have 1 minute. Supplementary question.
That's right, you can.
My supplementary is about the Minister for Local Government, aptly named James Brokenshire. He has written to the Combined Authority to request that the Mayor works in partnership with all members and partner organisations within the Combined Authority area. Will the Scrutiny Committee be investigating the quality of partnership working in the Combined Authority?
Thank you. Councillor Singer.
Thank you. I had been going to go on to talk about the meeting at which other councillors had failed to turn up, and the fact that although that was an unfortunate event, during the past year, most of the time, councillors from across different parties have worked together very well on scrutiny, and I hope that that will continue. I think that the letter from James Brokenshire is very interesting and very important, and I hope that it will have been taken seriously by the Mayor and the Combined Authority. There was a worrying implied threat in that letter from the Minister to say that the money that has been promised to the Greater Cambridge Partnership is not guaranteed, and that fighting between different groups could lead to the loss of that very significant funding for Cambridgeshire. I'm sure that the Combined Authority Committee, the Scrutiny Committee, will be taking a very close interest in the relationship between the Mayor, the Combined Authority, the Greater Cambridge Partnership, and all the member councils and partner organisations, and will be wanting to make sure that there is true partnership working across those groups. And it was very clear at the Local Government Association that other mayors have been working very collaboratively with their various districts and partners. I think there are some concerns about the level of collaborative working, and I have to say that some of the comments made earlier in this chamber, particularly about Councillor Bridget Smith, have not reassured me. So I hope very, very much that we can get over this antagonistic feeling within the Combined Authority.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Councillor Singer. Could I ask Councillor Giles to ask his question of Councillor Connor, please? You have 2 minutes, Councillor Giles.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, this is a question to Councillor Connor. Following the call-in by Overview and Scrutiny members regarding the Mayor's important interim transport statement, can Councillor Connor explain why himself and his fellow Conservative colleagues failed to attend this very important call-in meeting, thus meaning that the meeting was inquorate and the issue are not able to be debated? Does he agree with me that this apparent appalling conspiracy could bring the whole scrutiny process into disrepute?
Thank you, Councillor Giles. Councillor Connor, you have 2 minutes.
There is a statutory requirement to coordinate the transport priorities of the combined authority in the combined authority area. Next week, the combined authority will consider a report how this is to be done, pending consideration of that report next week. The combined authority decided to put new projects on hold to ensure proper coordination across the whole of the authority's area. The combined authorities overview and scrutiny committee can call in key decisions of the combined authority. As members will see from today's agenda on pages 12 and 13, this short pause was not a key decision of the combined authority. This matter was discussed at the overview and scrutiny committee on June the 1st. As members will have seen in their agenda packs for today's meeting, at the top of page 22, the Overview and Scrutiny Committee was advised that this was not a key decision and thus not open for a call-in. In the discussions held at ONS on June the 1st, it was clear that the majority of members of the ONS accepted the advice of officers. Nevertheless, despite there being no key decision to consider, and despite the majority of the ONS committee having accepted there was no key decision to consider, an attempt was made by some members of the ONS to call this matter in. Those who pushed for the call-in knew what the officers advised, that it was not a key decision, and therefore was not subject to a call-in. Those who again pushed for the call-in also knew the majority of the ONS committee had accepted that advice. There was no possibility of a valid call-in on the subject of this short pause until next week's report is considered. So it's made clear to me that the ONS procedures were abused by party political purposes, and I had no wish to be part of that abuse of that process. I therefore phoned officers 2 days before the schedule.
Thank you, Councillor Connor. 1, you're out of time, and 2, I think I have a point of clarification here.
By the staff of the combined authority, absolutely in line with the requirements for the combined authority. There was no sense that that call-in was in any way outside the rules. It absolutely complied with the rules.
Yeah, I think we're sort of straying off here. Thank you. I think, have you got anything to finish off, Councillor Connor?
I thought it was out of time. Out of time. Out of time.
You have 2 minutes afterwards.
So, if he wants a supplementary.
Okay, go for it. Go for it. Hang on. Let him do it. I'll let you go over. Thank you, Councillor Connor. Councillor Giles.
Thank you for that explanation, but it does then bring on the further question, which why wasn't the independent member informed of this fact? Because he turned up in Cambridge along with 2 other members of the scrutiny committee who were expecting the meeting to take place. So there appears to be a considerable lack of communication throughout the organisation. Can I have your assurance that you will investigate that and let me know what went wrong?
Thank you. You have 2 minutes, Councillor Connor, only.
If people don't use microphones, then the people out inside.
Councillor, Councillor Connor has just...
So Councillor Kinnersley, wouldn't want to upset you, would we? But yes, there was a Labour councillor who also didn't turn up. But yes, we will hopefully it'll be non-political, and we can all work together to scrutinise the mayor as best to our ability. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We move on to written questions.
All right.
Sorry, I do apologise. I apologise. Right, I'll start that bit again. We move on to written questions. Responses to the written questions received have been provided to the political groups before the meeting and published on the Council's website. That does conclude the business on the agenda for today. Can I thank members for their contributions? And we will have a group photograph 5 to 1 on the front steps.